Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I hope you've had a good day and thank you for joining us at this time of the day. It's lovely to see you all again, and welcome to our webinar on the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories and its connections with global citizenship education. Pip and I will be doing a bit of a tag team with you today. So our kaupapa today is really to learn through kōrero. We'd really like you to engage in the breakout sessions, to toss around some ideas with other people, and to come back and share those ideas as a whole. We're going to have a look at how the CAPE's Global Citizenship Education Framework aligns with the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, and have a look at connections and opportunities for us with global citizenship education and the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories. Just to remind you of the context that we come from as well, we are working within the Centres of Asia Pacific Excellence. So for us, we have North Asia, Southeast Asia and Latin America as our contexts. However, as a team, we also like to really look further afield. So we are funded through Centres of Asia Pacific Excellence who have a focus in those three areas. But global citizenship education, as we all know, is a much larger thing. And the next slide just reminds us of the map, really, that shows those regions that are the focus of the CAPES. So through the CAPES lens, we are looking at the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories. So first of all, next slide, Pip. Most of you will now be familiar with our triangle, which is our framework, which has the understand, the know, the act, and the change around it, and intentionally done to align as much as possible with the understand, know, do in the curriculum refresh. And a statement from our website is this one that you can read, but highlighted really are think critically, responsibility, take action, and create. Those are some key phrases and words that I'd really like you to keep in mind when we're talking about global citizenship education and when we're looking through the lens of that into the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories. So just going in, we have a look at our understand and reminding ourselves within our framework, we look at identity, connections, and global responsibility. And we did discuss, I think in the last webinar, that our thinking is changing as well. As we develop our understandings, we're looking at, is the terminology that we're actually using appropriate? Does it actually reflect what we mean? And so that responsibility has come as a change where we used to have that as challenges, and challenges sometimes has a bit of a negative connotation to it, and it didn't quite describe what we really wanted to express. So now we've changed that to responsibility. So there we have our understand. Those are the three big ideas. Then we have our know. So we need to know our local and global contexts. And you'll see further on, we talk about acting local and spreading out from there. So, you know, we can look out into the wider world, but actually what's doable in our own local area to start with? Where can we practice all those things and actually expand those skills that we develop along the way? Acting and changing. These are two ideas that I also want to explore with you today. We have do in our curriculum language, but acting and changing is a wee bit different. And when you see the alignment with the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories and what is written in do for that, you will actually notice the difference between act and change and what the do actually says. So let's pop to the next one. And again, our tohu, identity, connections and responsibility. And remember, you can access all this information on the Global Citizenship Education website that we have. So here we are looking at the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, our understand, our know and our do. So how does that align with global citizenship education? This was actually a really good challenge for me to actually go through Aotearoa New Zealand's histories as a process and look at how I would align it. And I think it might be the next one, Pip, that I started putting together this little diagram, and then we were having one of our team meetings, and I sidled up to Jan Marie and I said, Jan Marie, I'm having trouble getting this all aligning. How do you think this should go? And by a process of collaboration, we came up with this. And so at the top, you can see we have our framework, and we have our Understand, Know, Act and Change for global citizenship education through CAPES. Across all of them, we have identity, connections, and responsibility. They flow through everything. And then I took the Understand, Know, Do from the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories and popped them in. Actually, when you look at it, some of those could really be changed around, couldn't they? You know, it's very hard sometimes to put things into a box because things actually cross over quite a bit, don't they? But one of the things I really noticed was the act and the change. When I looked at Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, the do said identifying, exploring, interpreting. But to me, that's not acting and changing. Acting and changing is slightly different, isn't it? You know, identifying and exploring, that really to me comes from, you know, that language around Bloom's taxonomy that we want to use with learning outcomes. But what does act and change really look like? So if we flip to the next one, Pip. So taking some of that language from the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, identify and interpret, for me, when I was thinking about acting and changing, I was thinking, what are the skills that our young people are actually going to need to do to be able to act and make change? They might learn all this stuff, they might know about it and know how it affects their identity and be able to connect, but what's the act and change? How are they going to do that? And these are the sorts of things that kind of fell out for me that we really need our students to actually be able to do. So that process of really actively listening to someone, you know, sitting back and just closing your mouth and listening, really listening well, and then developing those questioning skills and becoming curious about things. And those critical thinking skills that we really want our students to develop, because I put that little image in, you know, problem solving skills, they're going to need those. For our global citizens, they're really going to need to know how to problem solve. But in order to problem solve, they need to learn to ask good questions. They need to learn to be critical thinkers. They need some inquiry and research skills. They need to be good communicators. And they also need to be able to think strategically. And we need some leaders coming through who can actually coordinate people and get people motivated. And they also need to be analytical. They need to be able to look at things, analyze them, and make sense of things. And you can probably think of quite a few more things to add to that list. But that was a big thing that came out for me in terms of do versus act and change. Okay. So enough from me, motoring on as I do. This is our time now for us to have a bit of a kōrero. So we're going to go into some breakout groups. And what I'd like you to think about is, given the alignment, that chart that I showed you with the understand, know, do, and the understand, know, act and change, what connections can you see in your school with global citizenship education and the histories? And what opportunities can you see in your school with the histories? If those are the sorts of things we really need to be looking at with our students. All right, Pip, do you want to?
Yeah, so those were the questions that we posed, but if you're anything like me, when I get into a breakout room, I don't necessarily stick to the scripts. Hopefully you've wandered all over and yeah, just share what connections you made, or basically just let us know what you were talking about in your groups. Jeff, I can see you unmuted.
I'm happy to jump in.
Oh, thanks, Tina.
It's all right. We were talking about how useful the framework has been or could be, and different ways it could be used. And we also sort of talked about how it's quite high level, big ideas, and how we can use it to sort of narrow down to some really practical outcomes or actions.
Yeah.
And sort of valuing both the really big ideas that are guiding us, but also the small steps.
So when you talked about the framework, Tina, were you referring to the Understand, Know, Do one, or the Global Citizenship framework? Or both?
A little bit of both, actually.
Yeah.
Using the Understand, Know, Do
Yes.
to bring about a deeper understanding of being a global citizen,
Right.
and global citizenship, and what that all means.
Yes, understand. Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Other comments? No, you.
Just one thought, and it's kind of out in left field. Is there, as we develop our frameworks, is it going to turn into a checkbox for accountability?
Did you find an answer to that question, or was that just a challenge that you've identified?
I think the three of us, our joint comment was, I hope not.
Yeah. And I guess it's in our hands, isn't it, to make sure that it isn't, that it is more than a tick box. And I think back to the old principles of the old New Zealand curriculum that we all just ticked off when we did our planning, and the same, and that started to happen, I saw, with the key competencies. And I think sort of picking up on what you were talking about, Tina, and your group around the big ideas and it being high level, I think if we can always keep in mind those touchstones, the big philosophical underpinnings of these things, then we do avoid it being a tick box, and sort of finding that line between the monitoring and knowing that we are addressing what matters, and making sure that we really focus on the deep understandings that sit with that. And I guess for us in global citizenship, it is not just the skills we develop in terms of identifying and interpreting in the case of the histories curriculum, but also the deeper, what action are we going to take, and what is going to be the result of that action? How are we creating a more equitable, sustainable future, and so on? So they are big questions, and I think we sometimes wallow in the minutiae and tick bits off in terms of little bits of learning, and I think if we can keep our mind on the big picture, that's really helpful. And that's why they call me Auntie Big Idea, because I'm raving on about big ideas. Anyone else?
Betsy and I were just talking about, because Betsy's in the classroom in Spanish in school. I'm not actually in the classroom at the moment.
Yes.
But we were talking about how it would be, I've got to say this nicely, useful to have a cross-curricular, a bigger picture of what other departments are doing and work together. Because often we actually only hear from our students what they're doing in other subjects, where we could actually work a bit smarter and work together on things. If we had a better understanding, or if there was more planning across different departments, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And you said it very nicely and tactfully.
Oh, thank you.
But I think it is a real challenge in the secondary setting to create connections across the curriculum, and yet it seems to be what is being asked of us and in schools generally. But some of the infrastructure and the systems don't allow for that kind of collaboration and integrated planning. It is really difficult.
It's a huge amount of time that would be required.
Yes, indeed.
To know how we could work together.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've talked about as a team is, and Mary, the image of the lens, I think if you're in a position to view it through the global citizenship lens and see how you can pull all of the learning together under, through this lens and think about those young people that we want to support the development of. But we have all those challenges. And, Jeff, you've highlighted the idea of the tick boxes. I wonder if this is, I'm not sure how many of you have had an opportunity to see the Te Mātaiaho, the new draft framework for the refreshed curriculum. Have you seen that? Yeah. Tina, you're nodding. It's really interesting because although they go down into the progress outcomes for each curriculum area, there's a very clear mandate around te tiriti, and one of the things they talk about is mutual responsibility and knowing who we are, where we come from, and what makes us unique as a country will enable a more confident international outlook. I mean, that's music to our ears because that's kind of what we're talking about. But I wonder if the connection is around the new draft framework as well. So, obviously the New Zealand Histories curriculum is the first part of that. Mary, any other comments that people have got around that? Any insights that they've gained from what they've been thinking about? Not necessarily about what I was just saying, but.
We were talking about the general goals, what is behind all of that, and that is tolerance among people of different cultures and ultimately moving towards peace in the world. Really, those are the big goals, and bringing it back to Aotearoa. There is a big push just to look at the relationship between Māori and Pākehā. And in the history curriculum, it's a lot about the conflict, the wars between Māori and Pākehā, and the colonial influences and the difficulties for Māori, etc. But we are a multicultural society. There's not just Māori and Pākehā in New Zealand, and that needs to be addressed as well. You're sort of touching on that aspect.
Thanks, Suzanne. I've just noticed that there are quite a few comments in the chat, but I think one of the ideas that's been raised before, and Libby's responded to this, is that, and so you talk about it as well, the IB, which has systems and strategies that allow for that. And the idea that vertical and horizontal planning, as you said, so is done in IB curriculum planning. I guess the challenge is that not all of our secondary schools have that sort of structure and that possibility, but I guess we can learn from that as well, can't we? Okay, thanks so much for those contributions. I'm just going to. Oh, I keep doing this. Mary, do you want to speak to this or?
So just briefly around this one then, as you mentioned, with the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, we're really looking at local and Aotearoa New Zealand as a focus. So really understanding what has shaped the things that have made society and our perspectives in New Zealand the way they are, and actually building awareness of and acceptance of what's happened, and then actually moving forward. If you move to the next one, Pip. So in the actual histories, there's a statement which I really liked, how the past shapes who we are today. And, this fits so nicely with our identity and our focus on identity. And Pip and I had the privilege of being in Aidenfield Christian School yesterday. They're having a cultural week this week, really highlighting that they had 35 flags going around the school with all the students, dressing up in their national costume and sharing, and different languages going everywhere, and it was really great. And the students were really engaged in it. And one of the conversations that came out of it was there was a student who had always gone under the New Zealand flag, And then the next thing, this year round, they said, no, I'm going to go under Holland. Oh, they just connected with their own identity and were like, no, I'm going to go under Holland, not New Zealand. And there was this real feeling of some sense of developing identity in that student, the teacher said. And so it was really lovely to hear, and it was valued in the school and it was valued by the other students. So it was really acknowledging their background and what made them who they are, as well as the fact that they were actually living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So one of the statements as well on that little banner, if we want to shape Aotearoa New Zealand's future, start with our past. So I think that is a really good hook for us when we're looking at global citizenship education, is really understanding our roots and our students really understanding their roots and what's brought them here and how they actually see the world and their place in the world. I have a little video that I'd like to share, and this is just a short minute video about identity, and it will lead into our conversation after this.
In order to think about who I am in a global context, I first need to locate myself within my local context and what has nurtured me and given me the knowledge that I have currently, which then enables me to think about how I exist in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and then how I exist in the wider global environment. If we know who we are, then we can be curious to other people who aren't the same as us and say, well, I know what I am and who I am. I'm curious to understand what the world looks like from your cultural upbringing, your language, and from your worldview. I talk about whakapapa and ancestry, but this global connection is about relational connections across countries, across geographies, across socio-political divides. This doesn't lessen who I am, but it gives me a greater opportunity to understand who I am in relation to other worlds, other knowledge systems, and other peoples.
A great example of just a summary of, how important it is to understand one's own identity, to be able to look out into the world. And you would have seen Pip there in the video with some students at Otopi Primary School and some cards. And I meant to mention those cards to you at some stage. Have you got them with you, Pip?
I have.
There are some really lovely cards that you can get. Have you?
I just need to take my background off, because when you've got a virtual background on it,
there we go, you can't see. There we are, perfect.
Right. So
if you're looking for a discussion starter to really surface some ideas that students might have, these across cultures, culture cards are really great, and Pip used them with the students at Otopi. And we use them with some Saudi teachers, actually, so we had to filter through things that were appropriate and not appropriate to put in front of them. So yes, do look through the cards to make sure that what you're using is culturally appropriate. But they are a really good discussion starter to unearth some assumptions or biases and some understandings that students might have. And it's really neat to come across little resources like that that can assist us in that way. But
sorry, Mary, I was just going to say what that also reminds of was something that we also experienced in Christchurch, and it's not something I think is new to us. Focus a lot on the culture and aspects of culture that are below the surface, that are not immediately visible to us, and we spend a lot of time. And I think Sarah Jane alluded to it there, the differences and so on. But it was really interesting at the school that Mary and I were at. The principal spoke very briefly, but one of the things he said was, in fact, he alluded to all the differences and the number of nations that were represented in this wonderful school. But he said, we are more alike than we are different. And I just thought that was such a lovely way of reminding us of that at heart. And I think, Suzanne, you alluded to that as well. that we are human and we have feelings and emotions, and someone said to me today in the context of that same conversation, we all grieve, you know, when we experience loss. So I think it's a really nice thing to think about at the same time as we think about acknowledging and respecting our differences, also acknowledging how alike and same we are. So yeah.
Do you want to just write in the name and that of those cards for
Into the chat? Sure.
Chat. Thanks, Pip.
They're actually created by Jeannie McGee, who is from Hamilton and very experienced. She worked with English language learners and very experienced in that space. Right, so they are Conversity. And if you want to find out how to get a hold of them.
So while Pip's doing that, leading into the next part for our kōrero is, so how is knowing about our past a good thing for New Zealanders and our young people in particular, to actually, how is that a good thing when engaging with the Asia Pacific and the wider global community? How is actually understanding where we've come from? How is it about, you know, engaging with Aotearoa New Zealand's histories? How does that help them engage with the wider world? And, you know, what do we need to understand and know and do when engaging with others from around the globe? So what I'd like to do is lead into the next kōrero. We'll pop those questions in the chat, but really thinking about, okay, so if we engage with the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, we do the understand, the know, and the do, and our students have that, how does that help them? How is that a good thing?
Jeff had a lovely calendar, ethnic calendar he encourages his students to create. And it's to do with inquiring of families about their own whakapapa, their backgrounds. There it is.
Oh,
This particular one is, as I mentioned, this is where I got the idea. This is the Nimapu, who is one of the tribes in central Idaho. And so they've shared that with me. And when I worked with the students, I asked them to make a calendar
oh wow.
related to where their parents, their ancestors, in this particular case in the Philippines. And what it's doing is it's enabling the students to go back and find out who they are.
I really love that idea. I'd like to do that because I think I'm sort of, my knowledge stops, and you know, as our older generations die out, all that oral understanding and knowledge goes with them, doesn't it? And even the photographs, and yeah, that's a great idea, Jeff.
Yeah, we talked about that. Doesn't matter how recent or how long ago we came here, when we fundamentally unpack it back to the very simple notion, we came here for a better lifestyle. And then I interpret it with my two sons who work, and one lives in California, San Francisco, and the other one in London, and they've gone there for, you know, a better lifestyle because they've got jobs that don't exist in New Zealand. So, you know, and if we understand that, why we came here and why everyone else in the room, why did they come here, then I think that helps us to kind of connect. We actually all have something very much in common. Doesn't matter when we came, whether it was a long time ago or yesterday.
Very good point, Sue.
And that is a very strong thread, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Terrell.
We talked about how often either the sensitive points when we're interacting with someone from another culture where there might be some conflict or the strong differences between cultures that we might not understand initially on the surface can often be explained and understood better when you go back and see where they came from in the past.
It's also such an interesting insight. I don't know that I sort of thought of it in that way. We just wanted to pop this in, and you can read this. This comes from the new draft framework, Te Mātai Aho, and it's from one of the sort of, I suppose you're going to call that the front end of this document, the Mātai Nuku, the creating a foundation. And this is taken directly out of that new document, or the draft document. And I feel as if all of those comments that have been made have in some way touched on those ideas. And so we just wanted to feed that in and just reinforce that idea about how, I guess it's our hope, is that the new framework is making it even easier and almost mandating for us to take this more big picture perspective and ensure that what we're doing in schools is actually drawing on our collective histories and identities and so on. So, Mary, do you want to?
Yeah, so a big thing for me is the language that we use. And as we start to use particular words and phrases, it starts to impact on the way people think and how a whole group interacts when you start to change the language around that. So when we're thinking about global citizenship education, and we're thinking about looking at our school curriculum and looking at the Aotearoa New Zealand's histories, what's the language that we are actually using, and how is the language actually connecting all of those things together? And so as a powerful tool, basically, we have our words like identity, connections, responsibility, understand, know, do, act, change, appreciation and valuing versus tolerating. There are differences in meaning. Global, local, globalization, another one that comes up. When we as a team talk about globalization, it kind of means like a homogenization of things. Whereas when we're talking about global citizenship education, we're talking about valuing the diversity, all right? Not wanting everybody to be the same, that difference is celebrated, but we have perhaps common goals. And then we're talking about thinking critically and creatively, belonging, inclusion, empathy, and challenge versus opportunities. So challenges can seem like hurdles, opportunities make them seem a bit more positive. So, think about the language that you're using. What is the language in Aotearoa New Zealand's histories? What is the language that filters through the rest of your curriculum areas? And what is the language that really aligns it all with global citizenship education as well? And the more we start using those words, the more it becomes embedded in what we're doing in the school.
Just while we're finishing up, Mary, we were talking before, we just got an email through from the ministry just confirming that the new curriculum has been gazetted now, so it is mandated and as of 2023. But one of the interesting things was that the ministry is offering, what do they call it? Capability developing or capability enhancing professional learning opportunities. We're not sure exactly what those look like, but I guess watch this space and we will see. But and yeah, so there will be opportunities to build on this. I mean, and obviously we're preaching to the converted in a way because you're here.
But it was, when we talk about language, that notice that we had in it a curriculum that encourages ākonga to be critical citizens by learning about the past to understand the present and prepare for the future, which really is exactly what we're talking about today. So lovely to have that language flowing through. Yeah.
And I think it means that you will be at the forefront because you're already thinking in this way.
Yeah. And I know that it can be a real challenge when you're talking about making those connections across curriculum areas. But we were talking to a secondary teacher today who is in the international space. And she said she's been doing some curriculum mapping with some of the big things that are happening in the school. And sometimes it's really hard to herd cats, you know, and get everybody working together. But if you've got someone that can actually do some overviews and draw people together, that can be really helpful. So, you know, there's also something there for you to explore and start the ball rolling. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you again and learning from you as well. Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
so much for being such stalwarts. We really appreciate it. Ka kite.
Ka kite anō. Thank you.